Let me ask you something. When you think about the American Civil War, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Most people say one word: slavery. And yes, slavery was central. It was brutal, immoral, and deeply embedded in the Southern economy. But if we stop there, we miss something huge, something powerful that was quietly shaping every decision, every speech, and every battlefield strategy. Money. Specifically, cotton money. Because before the first shots were fired in 1861, there was already a different kind of war happening, not with bullets or cannons, but with banks, trade routes, tariffs, and global markets. And at the center of that silent war was one simple plant: cotton. Now, imagine the world in the mid-1800s. Factories in Britain are roaring. Textile mills in places like Manchester are hungry, constantly hungry, for raw cotton. Europe is industrializing fast, and cotton is the fuel feeding that industrial fire. And guess who produced most of the world's cotton?
Liverpool.
The American South. By the 1850s, the southern states were producing around 3/4 of the world's cotton supply. Think about that for a moment. That's not just influence. That's economic leverage. Massive leverage. Southern leaders even started to believe something almost arrogant, but not entirely wrong. They called it King Cotton. The idea was simple. As long as Europe depended on Southern cotton, no foreign power would ever dare to oppose the Confederacy. Cotton wasn't just a crop, but here's where things get interesting. Because while the South controlled cotton production, but here's where things get interesting. Because while the South controlled cotton production, they didn't control the financial system behind it. The banks, the shipping insurance, the credit networks, and the industrial processing. Most of that power was in the North and in Europe. So in reality, cotton made the South rich, but it also made them dependent. They grew the raw material, but the North financed it, transported it, and manufactured it. And that imbalance created tension long before the war officially began. You see, the Northern economy was becoming increasingly industrial. Railroad, factories, steel, finance. It was a diversified system built on multiple pillars. If one sector slowed down, others could compensate. The Southern economy, on the other hand, was heavily concentrated. Cotton dominated everything. Land, labor, exports, and even political identity were tied to that single crop. So the question wasn't just about morality or states' rights. It was also about economic control. Who would shape America's financial future? An industrial North or an agricultural South built on cotton exports? Now add tariffs into the picture. The northern states supported protective tariffs. They wanted taxes on imported goods so American factories could compete with European products. It made sense for an industrial economy, but for the South, tariffs were a nightmare. Why? Because the South exported cotton to Europe and imported manufactured goods in return. High tariffs meant European countries might retaliate, buying less cotton or charging more for finished products. In other words, tariffs threatened the very trade system that kept Southern wealth flowing. So every tariff debate in Congress wasn't just a policy disagreement, it was a financial tug-of-war over the future of the American economy. Industrial capitalism versus agricultural export capitalism. And both sides knew the stakes were enormous. Now let's slow down for a second and look at how cotton actually functions as financial power. Plantation owners didn't just grow cotton and sell it immediately. Often, they used cotton as collateral, as they would promise future harvests in exchange for loans from banks. Especially in New York and London. That credit allowed them to buy land, more enslaved labor, and better equipment. So cotton wasn't just an export. It was a financial instrument, almost like a 19th century version of stock or futures contracts. If cotton prices stayed high, everyone made money. If prices dropped, the entire Southern financial structure became fragile, and that fragility created fear, because deep down, Southern elites understood something uncomfortable. Their wealth depended on global markets they didn't fully control. One shift in European demand, one economic downturn, or one disruption in shipping could send shockwaves through the entire system. So when political tensions with the North escalated, many Southern leaders started framing secession not just as a moral or cultural decision, but as an economic survival strategy. They believed an independent Confederacy could negotiate directly with Europe, remove Northern tariffs from the equation, and turn cotton into pure geopolitical leverage. In their minds, Europe needed Southern cotton so badly that Britain and France would be forced to support them diplomatically, maybe even militarily. But this assumption carried a dangerous risk. It assumed that global markets were as dependent on the South as the South was on those markets. And history would soon test that assumption in brutal ways. But we're not there yet, because before the war actually began, the United States was already splitting along invisible financial lines. Northern banks were financing industry and infrastructure. Southern wealth was locked into land, slaves, and cotton futures. European investors were watching closely, calculating profits and risks. It was like a massive economic chessboard, and every move, every speech, every election, every tariff bill shifted the balance slightly. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, many Southern leaders didn't just see a political opponent. They saw a threat to their entire economic model. They feared restrictions on slavery would eventually limit cotton production, weaken their export dominance, and erode their financial independence. So secession, in their eyes, wasn't simply rebellion. It was a high-stakes financial gamble. A bet that King Cotton would be powerful enough to reshape global alliances and secure the Confederacy's future. But betting an entire nation's future on one crop, on one global commodity, is an incredibly risky strategy. And as we move forward in this story, we'll see how that gamble played out, how blockades, market shifts, and unexpected economic realities began to expose the weaknesses hidden beneath the South's cotton empire. Because the Civil War was not only fought on battlefields like Gettysburg or Antietam, it was also fought in banks, ports, factories, and international markets. A war of bullets, yes, but also a war of balance sheets, credit lines, and global trade routes. The Union could still equip new armies, repair railroads, and supply distant fronts. The Confederacy, despite remarkable resilience and determination, increasingly faced shortages that no amount of battlefield courage could fully overcome. And that leads us to a deeper realization. The Civil War wasn't decided by one single factor. It wasn't just a matter of military strategy or political leadership. It was the cumulative result of industrial capacity, financial organization, global trade dynamics, and economic adaptability. In other words, the war's outcome was shaped by which side had the more sustainable economic model. The Union's model, diversified, industrial, financially centralized, proved capable of supporting a prolonged, resource-intensive conflict. The Confederacy's model, concentrated in agriculture, dependent on one major export, and vulnerable to external disruption, proved far less resilient under sustained pressure. When the Confederacy finally collapsed in 1865, it wasn't only a military defeat. It was the collapse of an entire economic vision for the United States. A vision where wealth was rooted primarily in land, slave labor, and commodity exports. A vision where global leverage depended heavily on one dominant crop. That system didn't just lose the war. It lost the economic future of the nation. And what replaced it? A new financial and industrial order. So when we ask, was cotton a cause of the Civil War? The most accurate answer isn't a simple yes or no. Cotton was the economic engine that amplified tensions. It tied slavery to global markets. It shaped political debates over tariffs and trade. It influenced diplomatic calculations and financial strategies. In many ways, cotton turned regional disagreements into a high-stakes international economic conflict. And that's the deeper story. The Civil War wasn't just fought over ideology or territory, it was also a financial reckoning. A decisive test of which economic model could survive, adapt, and sustain a nation through its most destructive crisis. By the end of that test, the illusion of King Cotton had faded. In its place stood a new reality. That lasting power in the modern world would come not from a single dominant crop, but from a flexible economy, strong financial institutions, and the ability to adapt when global markets inevitably change. And that financial transformation, more than anything else, helped define the United States that emerged after 1865, a nation reshaped not only by war, but by the economic forces quietly driving it all along. I hope you all have understood. Like and subscribe for more such videos, and also tell me in the comments on which topic you want the next video.